Welcome to this second segment of Burning Earth Radio. This is your host, Gerard Spring, coming to you from the subarctic. So folks, as we all know, Donald Trump has been elected to the office of the President of the United States. There's a couple trends with Trump that I want to point out that I think are really important to be aware of. The first is the issue of Trump and nepotism. And the concept of nepotism, for those of you who aren't aware, is the elevation of one's family members into positions of power. For example, this would be similar to the king appointing his son to some important post within the government or something like this. And indeed, we see this with Trump. We see this with the campaigning of the family. We see this with the parading around of Melania and the parading around of Ivanka Trump and Eric Trump and Donald J. Trump Jr. as well. So there is this implied notion through the campaign that a vote for Trump is additionally a vote for his family. I have to ask you, if you voted for Trump, did you vote for his family as well? Did you expect his family to come along? Even with Trump's victory speech, you have to remember that Trump came out in a parade with his entire family. So I want to take a look here at this notion of feudal aristocracy, because essentially what you have is that Trump is building a feudal aristocracy. Feudalism, also, for those of you who don't know, was a type of government, quote unquote, that existed in Italy in the Middle Ages and England in the Middle Ages. And essentially what you had was you had a feudal lord. And the feudal lord was a landowner. He would own land and people would work for the feudal lord. The peasants would work for the feudal lord. And additionally, the feudal lord was very tied into various dukes and things like this, and they would be in contact with the aristocracy or the wealthy members or the king himself, perhaps. So this is what government by feudalism actually looks like in practice. And you're seeing this with Trump, the development of a feudal aristocracy. If you guys are interested, I highly recommend reading the classic by Machiavelli, The Prince, because Machiavelli discusses what feudalism looks like in the text. And it's really important to note that the text is often misunderstood, as it's really much more of a political commentary of the politics of that era in Italy. It was very different than what we have today in a lot of ways. So I highly recommend the book if you're interested in a bit more on feudalism and aristocracy. So with the campaigning of the family, it's really no surprise that we have the Trump transition team as being 25% stocked with his family. We have the appearance of Ivanka Trump. We have the appearance of Eric Trump. We have the appearance of Donald J. Trump Jr. So in a moment, we'll take a look at each of these characters. But in the meantime, this installment of his family into the transition team in general is a very disturbing trend, because it really is the beginning of nepotism. It's the beginning of the elevation of his family members to political power, whereas right now they only have corporate or mercantile power. So this is a very big step of the transition, is that when you entrust Donald Trump, you're also entrusting Donald Trump to make wise decisions with the people he's going to bring on board. Again, you are the average of the people that you surround yourself with. I think it's important to note, folks, that when we entrust Donald Trump to make these appointments, we also have to take his social circle into consideration. You take the consideration the people that Trump hangs out with, those are most likely the kinds of people he's going to be bringing into power. Now, I hardly believe that of the 320 million American people, that his family members are the most qualified people for the job. There's probably many people out there who would be much more capable of running the administration and running the transition team than his family. So naturally, of course, we get Trump. And because we get Trump, everything that Trump does has his mark of quality, so to speak. And the most intimate incarnation of that is, of course, his family. So him bringing his family on board is really, really significant. And it's really a slap in the face of the American people, folks. I mean, you have to realize that Trump is building a business out of the presidency. And that's what Trump does. And if you realize that, to look at the successes and failures of his businesses, well, we all know what happens with Trump's businesses. So what do you think will be the result of his presidency? It just really, I just can't understand this, folks, why people don't have the capability to look at someone's past choices to understand what they might be inclined to do. And this is especially important with politicians, folks. I mean, if you have a politician who's voting in a certain way, then you would expect them to vote that way again. I mean, this was the whole issue with Hillary Clinton, that with Hillary Clinton, she has voted a certain way, and we would expect her to vote in that way in the future. We would expect her to act in the future as she has in the past. And the past reeks of corruption, so the future we expect would reek of corruption. But if we apply the same thing to Donald Trump, with his string of bankruptcies, his botched business dealings, his bungling attitude towards just about everything, his flippancy, his cavalier approach to things, his lack of ability to internalize real meaning out of reality, then we would expect him to carry this into the future. We would expect him to carry this idea into the future, this ideology of himself. And so how on earth people believe that someone who has largely been a failure in business, which again doesn't really say very much. I mean, because we also have a lot of criticisms about how the business world works and what you need to do to succeed in business and placing that as a virtue. But granted, he has failed in business. Why wouldn't he fail in politics? Why wouldn't he apply all of the knowledge that he's gained in business to politics? So, of course, we see Rudy Giuliani. Of course, we see Mike Pence. Of course, we see Sheldon Adelson. Of course, we see his family members, Ivanka, Eric Trump, Donald J. Trump Jr., Melania. So, I mean, to me, folks, you got to look at this and be skeptical. I mean, this is what the administration is going to be. As we continue into the future, folks, do not forget that Donald Trump is the minority candidate. Donald Trump lost the popular vote. Granted, we know that there's been issues with voting and the Electoral College and matters like this, but that being said, Donald Trump lost the popular vote. Only 50 million people voted for Donald Trump, whereas there's, 320 odd million people in the country. So if you do the math, it's like 18% of the country voted for Donald Trump. So it's very interesting, folks, to take this all into consideration, how this minority candidate, which really developed a core fascist party within the United States, is given power by a minority of the population. I mean, which voted as a bloc and really believed in this. I don't think the majority of Americans believe that any candidate would do better or worse, to be honest. So, I mean, given by the extremely low voter turnout, it speaks of just general despondency within the American population. So without further ado, I would like to take a moment to look at some of the family members of Donald J. Trump and to see what we might expect on the transition team. First, we have Eric Trump. Now, Eric Trump's a really interesting character because Eric Trump is clearly Donald Trump's protege. And it, in a way, feels like Eric Trump is Donald Trump's favorite son, so to speak. When we saw his, son on TV, it was usually Eric Trump. Eric Trump has a lot of the same kind of body language. He speaks in a lot of the similar ways to Donald Trump. He's decadent like Donald Trump. So he in a lot of ways embodies Donald Trump a lot better than Donald J. Trump Jr. So Eric Trump is, of course, the owner of Trump Winery, and he's the administrator of the 18 Trump luxury golf resorts, which are scattered about the globe. So if we look into these golf resorts, folks, it's interesting to note, like in Scotland, There was a small town. I don't remember the name of the town, but there was a documentary film on this, which was really, really wonderful. I recommend to take a look at that. But the golf course was to be placed on an ecological reserve. It was like a natural park in that area of Scotland, and there were a lot of people there who also had property close by to the nature reserve, and it was a really beautiful, calm, rural place. And in order to take the place, not only did Trump have to come in and convince the city council to allow him to develop the land and develop the ecological reserve, he also had to convince the town's Congress or town board of directors to allow him to take the land of the people who had been living there for, decades. So, I mean, Eric Trump is, of course, the owner or the administrator, rather, of these golf courses. So, I mean, he was in on all of these business dealings. So we know what to expect with Eric Trump. They're very closely linked. We also have Donald J. Trump Jr., which is the vice president of the Trump Organization. Yes, the Trump Organization, notorious. Donald J. Trump Jr. is a rather shadowy figure. He doesn't really speak very much, and overall, we don't really know a lot about Donald J. Trump Jr. So it'll be really interesting to see how his role develops on the transition team. We also have Ivanka Trump, who I think is really the most interesting character and the character we really need to watch, because I'm not sure, but it really seems to me like Ivanka is very important within the Trump Organization. She serves some very critical roles. She's very close to Trump. She's almost like a consultant. Ivanka Trump is the consultant of the organization, and Trump needs Ivanka in order to run the organization, that's totally clear. It's obvious. So it's almost as if Ivanka Trump is controlling Trump. She's the one who's largely responsible for the strategy behind what's going on. So look out for Ivanka Trump, everyone, who is, of course, a very qualified person to be on Trump's transition team. I don't think Trump could even survive without Ivanka. So looking at this, there's a very interesting kind of deep relationship, quasi-sexual, between Trump and his daughter, even reflecting back on some of Trump's lewd comments regarding his daughter, which occurred very early in the campaign when Trump first came out for the presidency. So all of this stuff has just gone down the memory hole, folks. I mean, people just don't remember that this happened, despite the fact that it was pumped through the news almost constantly. So we also have on board Ivanka's husband, who is Jared Kushner. And this guy is essentially a big property guy. He owns a lot of properties, and he is a billionaire, essentially. Ivanka Trump is, of course, married to someone of the billionaire class. So he owns a lot of property in New York City, a lot of commercial real estate, and he's also notable for his $1.9 billion AIG sale before the crash in 2008. So he swiped on the AIG deal $1 billion. That's $1 gigadollar. So just to put this in perspective, folks, I mean, I think it's interesting to look at how much $1 gigadollar actually is. How much is $1 billion? So the average household income for an individual in the United States is about $30,000 a year, 30 kilodollars. So if we take 0.7 of that to represent real income, because of the taxation, which is a low estimate, or to be honest, the taxes are actually higher if you add them all up. This turns out to be 47,000 years of work for the average American to earn the amount of money that Jared Kushner swiped off a sale of AIG stocks before the crash. Think about that, folks. 47,000 years of the average working American's wages he made in a matter of minutes, probably. So just to put this in perspective, folks, I mean, 47,000 years is a long time. I mean, 47,000 years ago, Scandinavia was glaciated. There were glaciers going down into the North American continent, almost down to Missouri, almost down to St. Louis. This is a geological timescale we're talking about here. So, I mean, this isn't ridiculous, folks. I mean, how anyone can take the monetary system seriously when you have this kind of thing going on, and how anyone can perpetuate the notion that the system is in any way honest is just absolutely beyond me. So we have these guys on the Trump transition team. We have, in essence, a feudal aristocracy. We have feudal lords who are now grouping together in essentially family groups in order to run a country or run a state for their own profit. So it's very important to also look at the global implications of Trump's rise to power, because ultimately it has far-reaching consequences for politics around the world. In particular, I'm thinking about the empowerment of the far-right groups in Europe. For example, in Germany. I mean, in Germany, there's a massive immigration problem. You have immigrants coming from Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, East Africa, the Horn of Africa, Somalia. You also have immigrants coming from the Middle East, coming from Syria, and even as far away as Afghanistan, in the center of the Asian continent. So there's a lot of migration, and this is generating the rise of far-right parties in Europe in response to issues with the immigration, which is, by the way, on a scale which is several orders of magnitude larger than immigration into the United States. So we have in Germany a community building a wall, a 4-meter wall around an immigrant community. We also have a rise of the far right in Sweden. We have the Swedish Democrats, which is essentially a very right party for Sweden. We also have in France, Marie Le Pen is back with her very strongly nationalistic movement. So with Trump, to put this in perspective, there's a far-reaching consequence of establishing the far right as being okay in Western politics. So overall, we are dealing with a fascist here, folks. We're dealing also with a feudal lord. We're also dealing with the development of a very powerful aristocracy with Trump. I mean, and this is coming in addition with all of the miscellaneous fascist elements of Trump, such as the large rallies, the sloganeering, the arrival by plane, the chants of the Trump camps, build that wall or make America great again or lock her up, with regards to Hillary. I mean, these are all very simple slogans, very easy to remember, very easy to capture, and very resonant with a lot of ideas that are going with the American population. It's almost as if the entire thing is memed. You have Trump, Pence, both being one-syllable words. I mean, everything is supposed to be simplistic. That's the formula of Trump, everyone. To the outside, to the exoteric world, you have a concept of simplicity, of power, and of reduced intellectualism, anti-intellectualism. And in the esoteric sense with Trump, you have nepotism, you have aristocracy, you have feudalism. So I think I'm going to call it a show for now, folks. I hope you enjoyed the show. There's a lot of really difficult things going on right now, and it's important that we all take heed to that. And if you enjoyed the show, please comment, like, and subscribe. It's always great to hear feedback from listeners and to hear everyone else's ideas on things.